If you're 30 years old in America and you have $20,000 in savings, you're not broke. But if your feed shows 3 people closing on houses this month, it can feel like you are. And that feeling is expensive, not emotionally, structurally. Here's the pivot. At 30, you don't usually change your income overnight. You change your commitments. Someone you know posts the keys. Someone else posts a promotion title. And you look at your bank app, and your progress suddenly feels like it's happening in slow motion. You're not comparing numbers. You're comparing timelines. So the first decision doesn't look like panic. It looks like maturity. You open Zillow just to see what's possible. You filter homes around $500,000 because that sounds normal now. You run the mortgage calculator. 5% down is $25,000. Then closing costs, inspection, moving, and the number that matters is closer to $35,000. That's not a detail, that's your cushion. And here's the question most people skip. If you wire most of your savings into a down payment, what problem are you solving? A housing problem or a status problem? The monthly payment estimate comes back at $3,400 with taxes and insurance. Your rent is $2,100. So you just increased your baseline by $1,300 a month. That's $15,600 a year. After-tax dollars, not theoretical dollars. You tell yourself it's fine because you're building equity, and that can be true. But equity is slow. The payment is fast. One builds over decades. The other hits on the 1st of next month. Now switch the scene. Maybe you don't buy a house. Maybe you buy the look of stability instead. You've been driving a paid-off car. It's boring, it's reliable, and it doesn't signal anything. Then you test drive a $44,000 SUV. The dealer talks in monthly numbers because monthly numbers feel harmless. It's $685 a month for 72 months. That's nearly $49,000 in payments. Before higher insurance, before maintenance. Here's what's strange. Nobody signs a 72-month contract because they did careful long-term planning in the showroom. They sign it because they want the discomfort to stop. They want the "am I behind" feeling to go quiet. And this is where the cost actually starts. Not in the house, not in the car, in the speed. Because urgency doesn't just make you buy things. It makes you buy them earlier than your life is ready to carry them. At 30, most Americans are still stabilizing. Income is rising, but not settled. Benefits are there, but healthcare costs still surprise you. Student loans might still be on autopay. Rent still moves up faster than your comfort level. So the question isn't whether you can pay something this month. The question is what you're making non-negotiable for the next 6 years. Because 6 years from now, you might be a different person. Different job, different city, different priorities, same payments. I'm Sheldon, and in this video, we're breaking down the financial cost of feeling behind at 30. Not by repeating advice, by tracing how one pressure-driven decision turns into a structure your future self has to maintain. At first, nothing dramatic happens. You adjust to the new payment. Your paycheck still covers everything. You tell yourself it was the right move. And maybe it was. But here's the subtle shift. Your financial life just moved from variable to fixed. Before, your largest expense was rent. If you needed to relocate, you waited for the lease to end. If you wanted to downsize, you could. Now your housing cost is locked behind a 30-year contract. That doesn't make it wrong. It makes it heavy. Let's layer the car into this. Mortgage at $3,400. Car at $685. Insurance increases by $120. Utilities in a larger home add another $200 compared to your old apartment. Your new fixed baseline is roughly $4,400 to $4,600 a month before groceries, gas, or investing. That number becomes your survival line. Not your comfort line, your survival line. Now introduce a simple tension test. If your income dropped 20% tomorrow, how quickly would stress enter the room? 1 month, 2 months, immediately. This is where people misunderstand risk. Risk isn't buying a house. Risk is buying inflexibility before your income has matured. Because in your early 30s, income growth is still ahead of you. Most Americans see their strongest earning acceleration between 30 and 45. But that growth only matters if you can tolerate movement. Let's say 3 years into the mortgage, your company offers you a role in another state. Same pay at first. Higher long-term trajectory. You sit at your kitchen table running numbers. If you sell the house, you'll lose 6% to agent commissions. On a $520,000 value, that's over $30,000 gone immediately. Add closing costs and moving expenses. The math suddenly feels tight. So you hesitate, not because the opportunity is bad, because your structure is expensive to unwind. Here's what most people don't notice. The cost of reacting at 30 isn't just what you buy, it's what you later can't do. Opportunity has friction now. Switching jobs has friction. Relocating has friction. Even taking a 3-month break has friction. And friction changes behavior. You start optimizing for continuity instead of growth. You protect the structure. You negotiate raises not to expand your wealth, but to defend your overhead. That's a different psychological posture. Now let's flip the lens. Imagine you delayed the house, kept your rent stable, kept your car paid off, invested the $1,800 difference monthly into low-cost index funds. After 5 years at 7% average growth, you'd have roughly $125,000 invested. That money doesn't show up in a driveway photo, but it shows up in negotiating power. It shows up in confidence during layoffs. It shows up in optionality. And optionality is quiet. It doesn't post. It compounds. This is where the escalation deepens. The emotional goal at 30 is often to feel established. The structural result can be becoming exposed. Because when fixed costs rise quickly, your margin shrinks quietly. And margin is what absorbs uncertainty. Without margin, every disruption feels larger than it is. With margin, disruption becomes a decision point. So the real financial cost of feeling behind isn't that you spend more. It's that you narrow your future decision tree. And narrowing your decision tree at 30 is expensive, because your 30s are still a decade of movement. You don't want to discover at 37 that you built a life optimized for stability when you actually needed mobility. That realization doesn't happen on the day you sign. It happens later, when something changes, and something always changes. Fast forward 5 years. You're 35. The emotion that triggered the decisions at 30 is gone. You don't wake up thinking about comparison anymore. You wake up thinking about payments. Mortgage drafts automatically. Car payment hits on the 12th. Insurance renews at a higher premium than expected. Property taxes adjust upward. None of this is dramatic. That's the point. The cost of urgency rarely explodes. It settles. Now here's the tension question. Are you building wealth or maintaining commitments? Look at the numbers. If your fixed obligations total $5,500 a month, that's $66,000 a year after tax. To generate $66,000 after tax, depending on your state, you may need close to $90,000 to $100,000 in gross income just to sustain baseline structure. That doesn't include investing aggressively. That doesn't include accelerating net worth. That's maintenance. And maintenance changes your behavior. Let's introduce friction. You feel burned out at work. Your manager changes. The culture shifts. 5 years ago, you might have walked. Now you calculate runway. 3 months of emergency savings feels thin against $5,500 in monthly obligations. So you stay. Not because it's aligned, because it's stable. Here's the subtle trap. When your structure is expensive, stability feels like safety. But sometimes stability is just constraint with good lighting. Now let's zoom out to 10 years. You're 40. Your income is higher. That's the good news. But so is everything else. Property taxes rose. Insurance rose. Lifestyle expectations rose. You upgraded furniture. You renovated the kitchen. You joined the country club because, at this stage, it felt appropriate. Every stage introduces new fixed layers. Here's the compounding effect nobody calculates. If instead of increasing fixed costs by $2,000 per month at 30, you had invested that consistently for 10 years at 7%, you'd be near $345,000. That's not theoretical wealth. That's liquid optionality. Now compare two 40-year-olds. One has strong home equity but limited liquidity. The other has substantial invested assets and lower structural overhead. Both may look similar externally. But internally, one can pivot faster. The other must defend harder. This is the escalation most people miss. The feeling of being behind at 30 doesn't just affect your 30s. It sets the tone for your 40s, because the structure you lock in early becomes the base layer everything else stacks on. And stacking on a heavy base reduces agility. Now here's the uncomfortable reflection. If you stripped away comparison at 30, would your 40-year-old self look different? Would you have chosen the same city, the same house size, the same car category? Or did you build to match a timeline you assumed was universal? There is nothing wrong with success. There is nothing wrong with ownership. But sequence determines stress. When growth follows income maturity, pressure is manageable. When commitments precede income maturity, pressure compounds. And compounded pressure narrows behavior. You don't notice it immediately. You notice it when opportunity requires courage. And courage requires margin. Without margin, courage feels reckless. With margin, courage feels strategic. That difference is structural, not motivational. And structure is built through timing, not comparison. Let's examine the timeline itself. Who decided that 30 is the checkpoint? Where did that rule come from? House by 30, senior title by mid-30s. Marriage, kids, stability locked in early. That model made more sense in 1980 than it does today. Back then, median home prices were a smaller multiple of income. College debt was lower. Career paths were linear. You joined a company and climbed one ladder. Today, the American career path looks different. People switch industries. They work remote. They build side businesses. They get laid off and pivot. They go back to school at 38. The income curve is uneven. But the psychological timeline hasn't updated, and social media compresses it even further. You see someone's closing photo. You don't see that their parents wired $60,000 for the down payment. You see the Tahoe in the driveway. You don't see the 84-month financing term. You see the vacation in Italy. You don't see the $12,000 credit card balance at 19% APR. Comparison is incomplete data presented as complete evidence. And your brain fills in the blanks optimistically. Here's the deeper distortion. At 30, time suddenly feels scarce. In your 20s, delay felt harmless. At 30, delay feels permanent. If I don't buy now, I'll be 40. If I don't level up now, I'll fall behind forever. But financially, 30 is not late. In most American income trajectories, 30 is the beginning of the steepest earning years. Between 30 and 45 is when promotions, specialization, and business ownership often accelerate income, which means this is the phase where flexibility is most valuable. Not visibility, flexibility. Because flexibility allows you to reposition before income peaks. Here's the inversion. The decade where people feel the most pressure to look stable is the same decade where structural mobility matters most. That contradiction is expensive. If you lock in maximum fixed costs before your earning power stabilizes, you reduce the benefit of future growth. Future raises go towards supporting past commitments, instead of building new assets. Now let's shift perspective. Imagine your 45-year-old self looking back at 30. Would they thank you for accelerating optics or for preserving optionality? Would they value the slightly larger house or the freedom to change direction twice without financial damage? This isn't anti-ambition. It's anti-reactive ambition. There's a difference. Healthy ambition builds gradually on stable foundations. Reactive ambition compresses timelines to match external signals. And compression increases fragility. You don't feel fragility when income is steady. You feel it when uncertainty enters. And uncertainty always enters. The American economy moves in cycles. Industries evolve. Companies restructure. Technology replaces roles. Your resilience depends less on your title and more on your margin. Margin isn't flashy. It doesn't trend. But it absorbs shock. So the real question at 30 isn't whether you've achieved enough. It's whether your structure can handle change. Because if your structure is fragile, success feels stressful. If your structure is resilient, growth feels expandable. That distinction doesn't show up in a birthday post. It shows up in your 401k contributions, your liquidity, and your monthly baseline. And those are invisible to everyone except you. So what is the real financial cost of feeling behind at 30? It's not embarrassment. It's not envy. It's acceleration without alignment. When you feel late, you compress decisions. When you compress decisions, you increase commitments. When commitments rise faster than income maturity, margin shrinks. And when margin shrinks, your future becomes narrower than it needed to be. That's the mechanism, not emotional. Mechanical. Here's the confrontation. If no one could see your life, would your timeline change? If there were no posts, no comparisons, no reunions, no subtle status signals, would you still have signed the same contracts at the same speed? Maybe yes, but if the honest answer is not yet, that matters, because timing determines pressure, and pressure determines behavior. Look at your fixed monthly baseline, mortgage or rent, car payments, insurance, student loans, subscriptions, minimum investing contributions. Add them up. That number quietly controls your career flexibility more than your ambition does. High baseline means fewer risks. Lower baseline means more options. That's not philosophy, that's math. The American financial system is built on recurring payments. Once you enter those systems, they don't adjust for emotional clarity later. They persist. Your 40-year-old self inherits the structure your 30-year-old self built. And that future version of you may value mobility more than optics. Here's the reframe. You are not behind because someone else bought earlier. You are not late because someone else posted faster. You are only behind relative to a timeline you didn't design. And building your life around someone else's timeline is one of the most expensive habits you can develop, because comparison creates urgency. Urgency creates commitments. Commitments create rigidity. And rigidity limits upside. Ambition is powerful when it's internally defined. It becomes costly when it's externally triggered. So the next time you feel that quiet pressure at 30, don't ask, how do I catch up? Ask, what structure am I about to lock in? That question alone can save you years of constraint. If this breakdown helped you see the mechanics behind that pressure, press like. And if you want more structured analysis of how everyday American financial decisions shape the next decade of your life, subscribe. Because the goal isn't to win at 30, it's to build a structure that still works at 45. You are not behind. You may just be reacting to someone else's timeline.